The Karen sisters spotted me sitting on the porch of my lakeside office, the one they walk past every day, and immediately called 911, claiming a suspicious man was trespassing. But when the dispatcher looked up the location, they laughed. Why? Because I'm not only the guy they were reporting him, their landlord. I own the entire complex, the land, the lake, and even their HOA building. The officer who showed up, he apologized to me and fined them for filing a false report. The Karens haven't made eye contact since. Lesson learned. Don't call the cops on the man who cashes your rent checks. That it was supposed to be a quiet Monday morning, just me, a mug of strong black coffee, and the sound of lake water gently lapping against the posts beneath my office deck. But the Karen sisters had other plans. I had just settled into my favorite Adirondack chair on the wraparound porch of my lakefront property office, the morning sun rising over the glistening water, birdsong drifting from the trees, when I saw them. Brittany and Tiffany called down the private trail with that unmistakable mix of entitlement and aggression carved into their frozen brows. Their matching pastel tracksuits, designer sunglasses, and oversized purses screamed HOA royalty, and I already knew, from past interactions, that the term boundaries wasn't in their vocabulary. They lived 2 houses up the shore in the gated section of the development I owned, as in the land, the lease agreements, the common areas, and even the HOA charter itself were part of the package I inherited when I purchased the entire lakeside development 2 years ago, from a retiring billionaire who needed someone with grit and a good lawyer to deal with it. I kept a low profile for months, managing the property through a shell company and letting the HOA run itself like a glorified circus of Karens, and the Karen sisters had practically crowned themselves queens of that circus. They had no idea. I was the new landlord, the man they filed complaint after complaint against for invisible violations like improper gravel pattern near the mailbox, or suspicious humming noise during the evening, which turned out to be crickets. Today, they spotted me sitting peacefully, wearing jeans, a flannel shirt, and a ball cap, and assumed I was some random squatter or fisherman trespassing on community property. I watched as Brittany pulled out her phone while Tiffany scowled and pointed toward me. I already knew what was coming. They didn't ask a single question. They didn't walk up or introduce themselves. They didn't even check the brass nameplate mounted beside the front door of the office, which read JESDEN, Property Management. They just assumed. They had power, assumed they had authority, assumed I didn't belong. Brittany dialed with her long, fake nails tapping the screen like a typewriter on caffeine. I heard her voice, loud and shrill, even from 30 feet away. Yes, hi, we have a trespasser at the lake office. He's just sitting there, and he looks unkempt, possibly dangerous. Yes, send someone quickly. Please, we feel unsafe. Tiffany paced in circles, muttering about calling the HOA board immediately and having him removed permanently. I didn't move. I took a slow sip from my coffee, leaned back, and let the serenity of the lake do its thing. I knew how this would play out. I had property rights on my side, security footage rolling, and the dispatcher was about to give them a reality check they'd never forget. Because what the Karen sisters didn't know was that the 911 dispatcher that covered this area was Susan Palmer, a friend of mine from the town council who knew exactly who owned this stretch of lakefront. As soon as Brittany rattled off the address of the incident, Susan interrupted her. Ma'am, could you confirm the location again? Brittany repeated it with the authority of someone who's never been told no. Susan paused, then said something I'll never forget. Ma'am, that property belongs to Mr. Easton. He owns that lake office. He's your landlord. There was a silence so thick it could have suffocated a seagull. Brittany blinked, visibly shaken, and muttered, there must be some mistake. The owner doesn't live here. He's corporate. Susan chuckled through the speaker, which I could faintly hear from the porch. No mistake. That's his legal residence and business office. You just reported your landlord for sitting on his own property. Tiffany looked like she'd seen a ghost. She tried to whisper something, but Brittany wasn't done. Self-destructing. Well, he didn't look like he belonged here. He should have had a sign or something, Susan replied coolly. Ma'am, you're on thin ice. Filing a false report about your landlord. You might want to walk away before an officer shows up and takes your statement. I decided it was time to stand up. I walked slowly toward the porch rail and called out, good morning, ladies. Lovely day. For overreacting, isn't it? They jumped like I'd set off fireworks. I waved my coffee cup. You could have just knocked and asked who I was, but calling 911. That's bold. Brittany stammered, You own this. I smiled. I own this office, the surrounding 10 acres, and oh yes, your homes, too. Check your lease. Property records are public. Tiffany turned beet red. You're the guy who owns Lakeside Haven, LLC. That's me, I said, and you've filed 9 complaints against me this year. My personal favorite was porch chairs not matching the HOA vibe. The sirens in the distance signaled the arrival of Officer Jaden Mitchell, calm, steady professional who'd been with the sheriff's office for over a decade, and had a good head on his shoulders. He parked gently by the gravel path and approached slowly. Morning, Mr. Easton. he said with a nod. Got a call about a trespasser. I assume that's not the case. I held out my coffee and cheers. Not even close. Just enjoying the morning. He turned to the sisters. You two called in a report. Brittany cleared her throat. We thought he was dangerous. He wasn't wearing a badge or anything. Jaden raised an eyebrow. You called 911 because your landlord wasn't wearing a name tag. Tiffany tried a different angle. He didn't announce himself. Jaden exhaled slowly. You're standing on property owned by the very man you tried to report. That's not a good look, especially considering the department takes false reports seriously. Brittany tried to salvage some pride. We were just protecting the community, I interjected. By accusing the man who pays for your landscaping, security, and snow removal. Jaden pulled out his notepad. I'll need to document this for our records. If you're lucky, it ends here. But if I see another call about Mr. Easton from this address without cause, we're moving into civil fine territory. The sisters, deflated, their empire of assumed power had cracked like cheap acrylic nails. They offered a half-hearted apology and slunk back up the path, whispering furiously to each other. I watched them disappear through the tree line and exhaled. Jaden smirked. You handled that better than most. I've dealt with worse storms, I said. But I appreciate the backup. You need anything, you call me direct, he said, and then he left. I sat back down, took another sip of coffee, and enjoyed the breeze. Later that afternoon, I drafted a friendly but firm letter to the HOA board signed as Jonathan Easton, Managing Director, Lakeside Haven, LLC, informing them of the incident and reminding them that 911 should not be used as a personal complaint hotline. The letter ended with a note. A surprise compliance audit of HOA board conduct will begin next week, because if the Karen sisters wanted to play games, I was more than happy to play back. The fallout from the 911 stunt was faster and louder than the Karen sisters ever expected. Within 24 hours of their little performance, I had quietly circulated a memo to the HOA board, the community management team, and every resident within Lakeside Haven, reminding them about the proper use of emergency services and the consequences of filing false reports. I didn't name names, but everyone knew. Small communities are like still lakes. You drop a stone, and the ripple reaches every shore. The Karen sisters, who once pranced through the neighborhood as unofficial royalty, suddenly found themselves under a spotlight they hadn't scripted. Brittany stopped jogging past the lake in her branded activewear. Tiffany avoided the Marina Cafe like it was contaminated. Their usual barrage of HOA violations slowed to a trickle, and their weekly Karen's Corner newsletter mysteriously skipped circulation. I hadn't even formally disciplined them yet. Their power was unraveling all on its own. But I wasn't finished. Not because I held a grudge, but because their behavior had crossed a line. Reporting your landlord to the police without cause. That wasn't just dramatic, it was dangerous. They had wasted police resources, disturbed community peace, and most importantly proven themselves unfit to serve on the HOA board. So I dug in. Lakeside Haven LLC, the entity through which I owned the development, had legal authority to audit HOA proceedings, issue compliance reports, and if needed recommend the removal of board members for misconduct. And that's exactly what I did. I initiated a full compliance audit, brought in an outside firm, every HOA email, meeting record, complaint log, and expenditure was reviewed. What we found wasn't shocking, just sloppy. Funds spent on decorative upgrades to their personal properties. HOA meetings where only the Karen sisters voted often in their own favor. Anonymous complaints conveniently aligning with their personal grudges. I compiled the evidence, formatted it into a formal document, and scheduled an emergency homeowners meeting. I didn't need to sway anyone. The community had been waiting for a moment like this. The meeting was packed, every seat filled, with some folks standing in the back. I stood at the front of the lodge, laid out the findings, and finished with a single sentence. The leadership of this board must reflect the values of this community, not the vanity of two individuals who believe the rules don't apply to them. The vote wasn't even close. Brittany and Tiffany were removed from their board positions, effective immediately. Their replacements were elected by a unanimous vote. The Karen sisters didn't even stay until the end. They stormed out in matching trench coats and sunglasses, as if their shame could be hidden behind accessories. But they weren't quite done yet. 2 days later, I received an envelope in my office mail, no stamp, just hand-delivered and folded sloppily. Inside was a letter, hastily typed in full of bold fonts. It was a formal demand for a written apology, claiming that I humiliated them in public, that I orchestrated a personal takedown, and best of all that my aura of intimidation contributed to their emotional suffering. I framed it, not because I was proud of their downfall, but because it reminded me why I did what I did. This wasn't about ego. It was about protecting the integrity of the place I'd invested in, the people I cared about, and the peace I'd come to this lake to find. From that day forward, everything felt different. The air was lighter, the community friendlier. People who once avoided HOA meetings now came with ideas, not complaints. We added benches to the lakeside trail. We installed new dock lighting. Ranger, my old Shepherd Lab mix, became the unofficial mascot of the neighborhood, with kids feeding him treats as he patrolled my porch. And the Karen sisters. They tried to pivot online, rebranding as lifestyle realists and hosting live streams from their living room. But their views dropped, their influence fizzled, their power was gone, and it wasn't because I took it. It was because they misused it. One quiet afternoon, weeks later, I was sitting on that same porch again, coffee in hand, Ranger asleep at my feet, when I saw them, the Karen sisters, walking quietly past the edge of the lake trail, no heels, no makeup, no phones in hand. They glanced at me briefly, and I nodded. Just a small, civil nod. Not gloating, not smug, just acknowledgement. They didn't nod back, but they didn't call the cops either. Progress.